Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of Intellectus Campus. We are running this evening with our series in substance use disorder. This is the fifth of the presentations that we have run on this. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Rapiti to this session. Dr. Rapiti has certainly been very active in the world that I live in, which has been over the last 4 years looking at primary care. He is a medical professional with over 4 decades of service in family medicine, and he specializes in lifestyle management and primary care. He holds an MBBS, an FCFP, along with diplomas in child health, mental health, and asthma management. Dr. Rapiti's journey began in 1983 when he founded a thriving medical practice committed to delivering premier care and tailored treatment plans for chronic ailments. And Dr. Rapiti, I actually went to UCT in 1984. So you started your practice the year that I actually started medical school. Dr. Rapiti honed his medical skills through tenure at Livingstone Hospital in Port Elizabeth, which I can relate to. I did my intern year at Frere Hospital in the Eastern Cape, and it certainly was a trial by fire. And he has supplemented this education with various advanced certifications. Dr. Rapiti has emerged as a trusted expert in managing prevalent conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and obesity. And his dedication to continuous learning is evident through his active engagement in medical conferences, radio shows, international presentations, where he generously imparts his insights on addiction and preventative health care. Having done some time at Groote Schuur and in Victoria Hospital, I can guarantee you that 99.9% of the people in the Victoria Hospital casualty are on substances, and the trauma and the impact of that was certainly evident when I worked there in 91, 92, and I believe it's even worse now. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Rapiti spearheaded the treatment of over 3,000 patients afflicted with severe COVID-19 with a success rate of 99.97%, and he provided outpatient care to individuals with oxygen levels as low as 35%. So kudos to you, Dr. Rapiti. You demonstrated your ingenuity and dedication to patient well-being. He has now redirected his focus towards addressing injuries due to injections, offering hope and healing to patients afflicted with conditions like Guillain-Barré and turbo cancer. And his advocacy extends to serving as an expert witness for employees navigating concerns. Beyond his clinical endeavors, Dr. Rapiti is an esteemed author, penning the enlightening self-help book, 4 Steps to Healing, which provides invaluable insights into overcoming addiction. It simplifies the 12-step program, and it embraces holistic wellness. In every facet of his professional journey, Dr. Rapiti embodies a steadfast commitment to excellence, compassion, and innovation through medicine. So, Dr. Rapiti, I'm handing the floor over to you. Thank you very much for agreeing to speak to us tonight on this platform. And with that, I'm going to stop my video and mute my mic, and I'd like you to unmute and take over. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Jackie, and to all your viewers, and for this opportunity to address you today. It's a topic that's very dear to my heart. I've offered addiction medicine or treatments for the last 35 years, and I can tell you, I will be humble enough to say I don't know much about it because it's such a complex treatment or problem, and it's a continuous learning process. And I hope to empower your viewers today on how to deal with this complex and terrible disease, I would really call it. So I've got quite a few slides. I'm going to skip through some of them, but I kept them in for the sake of viewers who want to know something. We can go back. So I'm going to go far away, and I think we'll start. Sorry, why isn't this working? All right. Okay, I'm just going to give you some statistics. In the last year, there's been 296 million people who use drugs, and that's a 23% increase over the previous decade. And of that, 39 million people suffer from drug use disorders, And this is what I took from the net 40, and that's a 45% increase over previous years. I think this is an underestimate because I don't think they do their stats very well, whoever's doing them. Well, the National Center for Drug Abuse Statistics has shown in 2020, 50% of the US population from the 12 years, I don't know if you can see, 50 from 12 years and above, or up to 18. Yeah. There were 700,000 died, approaching 1 million people in the US alone. We don't keep much data in Africa, so we don't know how many people die. And I would expect that figure to be high in the US, and we'll talk about this, why this is so. The law alone in the US spends about $35 billion on law enforcement, and they're not even touching the tip of the iceberg, as we'll see later. In 2020, cannabis amongst the 12 to 17 years was about 17%. Opioid was about, in the 12 to 17 years was 1.6%, 18 it's 3. Opioid is a huge problem in the US. Fentanyl in the US takes over 100,000 lives annually. So I don't know what's this hoo-ha about COVID. I think more people are dying from addiction in the US and probably the rest of the world as well. Therapeutic dose normally for fentanyl for the medical profession is 0.2 milligrams. The illegal version, this is one here, sorry, is about, sorry, oh gosh, yeah. This one, I want to show you something here. The illegal version here is 2.5 milligrams. You can see it's 10 times more, right up to 9. And these are lethal doses. And they come mainly from Mexico and China. And the US is being infiltrated with humongous doses of this because of the country's open door policy. I'm not going to spend too much. I always go back down to South Africa and alcohol. We're the heaviest consumers of alcohol in the world. About 50% of the drinkers are binge drinkers, and binge drinkers are people who have problems that will not accept it. The Western Cape has the highest incidence of fetal alcohol syndrome in the world. That's due to the TOD system. And there are 200 different diseases, injuries, conditions, gender-based violence, violent trauma, and motor vehicle accidents associated with alcohol. And we're just going on promoting it, and we're doing very little. And alcohol, I'm sure in most countries, it poses a major burden on healthcare resources, both human and financial. The illegal industry is about 1% of the world's GDP. And to translate that into figures, that's about almost close to $2 trillion. $2 trillion. Africa's total GDP is $3 trillion. So that gives you an idea how big an industry the illicit drug industry is. Now, if you look at opium, 95% is produced in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has 177,000 Ks of hectares of opium. That's about 650 tons. And that's about $2.5 billion for Afghanistan. That's 14% of GDP. So they're not going to let go of that. And 100% of the coca plant comes from Peru and Bolivia. That's 100%. So they're heavily dependent. There are countries that are dependent on illicit drug production. So, it's a challenge. So, and then to add to it is the cartels have become sophisticated like nobody's business. They can deliver a drug without any personal interaction. That's how sophisticated. They bought into governments, they bought into the police force. So we got quite a big battle on our hands. The major drivers have been stress, political instability, and the biggest war in Europe after World War II. 3 years of lockdown and the stupid COVID policies has resulted in people abusing drugs because of boredom, depression, isolation, unemployment, just not having food and things like that, So I just want to give you my definition of COVID, of addiction. It's a chronic disease caused by chemical substances or physical activities like gymming, is an example, or going to the slot machines, characterized by episodes of relapses and remissions, alternating in varying intervals. I think that's a pretty simple definition. So it's a ongoing process. Now, I'm now going to the types of this addictions. The chemical substances, I would consider cigarettes as a serious one. I think GPs can do a lot in reducing cigarettes usage. Alcohol is, these are the legal ones, and the other illegal ones would be cannabis, even though it's not, it's decriminalized in South Africa, and hashish and mandrax. These are the sedating ones. Then there's heroin, it's also sedating. There's amphetamine, which is known in our country, I know what it's called as tick. For those of you want to know why it's called tick, is when they use a light bulb to light it, it makes a ticking, tick-tick sound. While cocaine is a more potent version of the stimulants. Then the others are caffeine, and I mean caffeine is quite a serious one. I find it pretty useless chemical. And there's a high incidence of grandpa addiction. I've had in one of my cases, I'll tell you, people take up to 8 per day, knocking off their kidneys and getting their lungs damaged. Energy drinks and Coca-Cola, but energy drinks are like your Red Bull and your whatever you want to call them, the Extra and Monster. These have got the equivalent of 8 cups of coffee, and you take a guy who takes 6 cans of these drinks, he's taking 48 cups of coffee. It explains why a store manager in the UK was used to taking 6 of them, dropped dead of a heart attack because of the high caffeine content. Then ephedrine, which all you guys are fond of giving in your cold and flu preparations. There's no cold and flu preparations. They're just ephedrine. They do nothing for your flu, but they, in fact, amphetamines is derived from ephedrine. So if you're giving your patient a bit of a flu preparation, you're giving them a high, you're not making them better. So it might be a good, I've had people who've been hooked on these things. Codeine tablets, they're pretty useless. And I call them, it's been called codeine misuse headaches. People get headaches from taking codeine, so they don't know this. And you got your discount selling these codeines in bottles of hundreds and making it sound you're getting a special. And OxyContin, I'd advise people, if you got Netflix, watch this movie of Purdue and what they did to OxyContin. It's an absolutely dangerous drug. Tramadol is pretty useless as a pain reliever. It's highly addicting. I see all these grannies get it, and they end up getting backache and muscle pains because of the tramadol, and the doctors in Grudis here don't know this. And I get my patients off tramadol, and I teach them how to cope with it. Morphine, of about 10, one study did about 10% of doctors are on morphine because they have easy access to it because of long shifts. For those of you who are fond of using SSRIs, I just need to let you know SSRIs are useless. They've never been found to work for depression, and they lied and said it was not addicting. It's highly addicting. And if you want to wean your patients off them, please do it gradually because they have terrible side effects. Then the benzodiazepines, I don't need to tell you. This is the order. This is the worst one. The diazepam is the worst one. Clonazepam is the next one. And alprazolam is short-acting, called Xanax. There's a big illicit market for this particular drug. And you have what's called the inverse effect. After a while, people become very agitated and behave like people that are on amphetamines. Not associated with addiction, but I thought I just mentioned that physician prescription in the US is a 3rd leading cause of death. Who said it's safe to go to your doctor any longer? I'd be very scared anyhow. Amphetamine is a stimulant, and the thing that we should be worried about amphetamine is psychosis. Usually in short term, it is reversible, but in long term, it's irreversible, and that's it, kaput for you if you ended up with long-term problems. Cannabis, on the other hand, affects your focus. People legalize and say it's wonderful, it's cool, it's Rasta, and they're singing Bob Marley. I don't know. It definitely it blunts your reflexes. Children, children, your brain only fully develops by the age of 25. So when children, I've had children taking cannabis because they left at home, no parenting. From the age of 7, they see the 8, 9-year, 10-year-old boys doing it. They do it. And that's doing irreversible damage to those brains. Their IQs drop, so they get affected. And one of things I found is that it is there is a fairly good incidence of psychosis, particularly if you have mental problems, and it's highly addicting, contrary to what people say. Heroin is also sedating. It's highly addicting. I would consider it to be the most addicting, one of the most difficult to come off. You can come off cocaine and Turk and maybe marijuana, but heroin is a very. I've treated over 1,000 patients just on with with opioid replacement, and I think I've only had one success. The rest of them all fell by the wayside, and the reason for that is the severe withdrawals. This gentleman here depicts the pain they go through. What the withdrawals of heroin are so dangerous. Are we competing with a truck there? Yeah, right. The severe withdrawal, the flesh actually feels like it's being torn, and a lot of people don't understand that. It's very unkind to put somebody with an addiction of heroin into a jail and not give them opioid replacement. It's terribly inhuman, whatever they did. So yeah, the high of this is so great, that they end up with frequent relapses. I mean, their reflexes are blunted. They feel in cloud number 9. So you put them on an opioid replacement. The replacement for it, by the way, is, I'm not going to go into details. At some other time we can talk about it. There's methadone, which is really another opioid in itself. Suboxone is also an opioid, and the dosage usually is tailored according to the usage. And I found that from my own experience using it for over 20 years now, and I've done an opioid course, and I have found that using 10 milligrams, you should rather use it twice a day than once a day, because though they recommend it once a day, I've not found it to be working so effectively. And it ranges between 10 and 20. In the US, they use up to 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, but these are the mad people. I don't believe in treating people to keep them on their drugs. I try and work my way with the patient to try and get them off their medication. Suboxone is probably kind of safer, very expensive, sublingually. You got the max, you start with 2 and go up to 16, and it's got a cutoff point. You could, if you're using methadone, and you've come down to lower doses, what I like about the liquid methadone is that you can get them down at half a ml at a time. But we're not going to go now. Now, the word addict for me is something I frown upon. I've been to over must be 1,000 meetings. That's where I learned, not in med school. If you want gold in the polished form, you go to a jewelry shop. You want gold in its raw form, you go to the gold mine. So I learned my addiction going to support group meetings, and I sat there and I listened to substance users talk. And I don't like the word addict. It's very derogatory. That's a human being we're talking about. And I don't think we should use those kind of terms. I prefer the word person with addiction. We don't call people even with diabetes, you're a diabetic. They don't go to me and say, I'm a diabetic. They have a name. So do these people. And I broke away from the AA and NA because I didn't like the use of this word. I'm an addict or alcoholic in recovery. I mean, for heaven's sake, you'd recovered for 20 years and you keep saying I'm an addict. And I think we know what society is like. The minute you talk about being on drugs in your past or alcohol in your past, they look at you askew. And that compromises your situation in the job market, in the social market. People look at you. And I think it's a very private matter. So I think what you go through is yours and yours alone, and maybe with your counselor. Then there's the other one. Once an addict, always an addict. I feel that's a pessimistic view. I don't think you can get anybody better by saying once an addict, always an addict. I frown upon it. I don't agree with it. Addiction is a painful condition. I don't think those of us who have ever understood it realize how painful it is. I've come across doctors who refer to patients, oh, you're a scumbag, you're useless, and you don't speak to people like that. If you don't know addiction, don't talk about it. because this is how they suffer. Mentally, they become depressed. Yes, they do. When they come off their drug and they come to reality, they feel the shame of themselves. They end up with psychosis. They're crazy. They've got anxiety. They've got suicidal ideation. I can't see my pictures there, but on the right is just a graphic presentation of what they go to. Physically, they suffer from malnutrition. They end up with TB. They end up with HIV, sepsis, all kinds of infections, hepatitis C. They get assaulted and they don't care. They will go into the most seedy areas. They get even assaulted by gangs who sell them and they can't pay. They get raped in jails. They get STDs. And they themselves get involved in homicide. They end up killing their own parents. And eventually they become the brutes that no one can recognize. They terrorize their families. One addict can affect 20 people. And you see, this empty classroom represents what it is. Once they're on drugs, if they're there, they're not quite there. They're imbibing nothing. They're a nuisance to the class. And I try to, suggest to the schools, education department, would you look at my program? Because I'm worried about the high incidence of addiction, because 1 in 4 children in our school, the study showed, is on some form of substance abuse or like cannabis. The life of a person with addiction, if they don't recover, it's death, jail, or institutions. They're treated as a scum of society. They're spiritually dead. They live for their folks. They're crimes of the worst kind. I mean, we all know the Alan Puckey story where the mother killed the son, but more often than not, it's the child killing their family. We heard about the Stellenbosch family where the son planned the murder of his entire family. They mad it for their families for their habits. They have no control of their addiction. It's not a case of having a willpower. People talk of willpower. You become a slave to this drugs. You lose all sense of control. How families affected, you can see this couple fighting with each other over somebody that's either got addiction or a child. The child himself is also affected. They suffer from depression. They feel neglected. The family also gets mentally depressed. They get anxiety. They can't sleep. And what do? We give them sleeping tablets, are useless. We give them benzodiazepines. We make another lot of addicts out of them. Physically, parents end up with heart attacks due to stress. And parents bury their children in the youth of their lives. It's a very painful thing. No matter, we might see them as a scum, but to the mother, that's the darling of her life. That's gone wrong. Financially, rehabs take their money. When they're drugging, it's the merchants screwing the child. When they go into the rehabs, I personally don't see the need for 5-star rehabs. I don't see it at all. They don't need 5 meals a day and warm swimming pools and 10 therapists. We'll talk about it later on. I just think it's one big racket. I've found that the best success comes from these cheap halfway houses where you containerize them. The users will sell everything. I've got families where they've got nothing. They will sell the kettle, they will sell the fridge, they will break anything. And these substance users will bring families apart. They will tear their entire mother and father end up divorcing. And they take great delight because what they do is they look for the soft parent and make the soft parent look so nice and caring, and they're highly manipulative. How to deal with addiction? There's no drug to cure addiction. There's absolutely none. And there isn't a one size fits all so you try different, it's different strokes for different folks because no two people are the same. There's different approaches, there's individual counseling, and which I'd like to appeal to you. You don't have to become a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a doctor. You just need to have a person that's got some degree of empathy and a good pair of ears, and you're good to go. Doesn't always stop addiction, but I think the first stage of individual counseling, when a patient comes to you doctors, listen to them and tell them, look, I would suggest you go to an AA, because they don't know where to go. And I'm afraid there aren't many AA meetings, NA meetings. They've all died down because of the violence in our areas. It doesn't always stop in addiction, and that's not the purpose of counseling. It's to initiate the start. So people get to know they can go somewhere. And you doctors are the best because you are hands-on, you're available, people can walk in. You don't wait 3 months like the government in this country tells you. Their rehabs gives you a 3-month waiting list. By that time, he either hung himself, killed somebody, or robbed his house mad. And then I've got my own 4 steps program, which we'll talk about. And then you got the rehabs. The rehabs have a 2% success rate, but there is a necessary place for them. Recovery, I don't think we should be using the word recovery. You can recover from an influenza, you can recover from a pneumonia or a heart attack, but you don't recover from an addiction because you don't know when you're going to relapse. So I think the term recovery is misleading. I would rather use the word achieving abstinence and maintaining it. That's the goal. And to do that, you keep running, you keep doing your program. This running is basically persevering. Very often in life, we fail because we fail to do the steps that keeps us on track. These guys go to 1 or 2 meetings, they read this 12-step program, say, oh, I read it, I know it all. And the minute you stop, it's like us doctors, we don't keep reading, we forget the stuff. I mean, if I'm too long on a holiday, I worry, gosh, can I treat patients? But whatever the case is, you never give up, no matter how tough the battle is, because your goal is to get on the top of the mountain to get rid of your addiction. So when you talk of recovery, it's not like this, oh, you got a tonsillitis, ma'am, or you got a sore throat. This when they give some antibiotics and you're good to go. This is a lifelong journey. And 90% of treatment comes from the user, not from you. You initiate treatment, they follow the steps. Something about substance users, if you're interested in treating them, they're the biggest liars. They're so good at it, they believe their own lies. They're highly manipulative. They learn the art. They can write textbooks on how to manipulate. They use below-the-belt tactics to get their fix. They tell mothers, you're not my mother. You're not fit to be a mother. And gullible mothers believe this and they fall for it. And they start buying them beautiful tackies and designer clothes only for this kid to go and sell it for 1/10 of the price to get one hit of tick. They become slave to drugs. Nothing or no one matters. They will take their family out. There's he. He's carrying his family's goods in the back there. And nobody can recognize his devil. That's the kind of guy he is. But inside him is a human being. They turn the family always wanting money for school and outings. If you've got a child, they lie to you. They're going to an outing. They want it for a Coke and a pie and God knows what. Meanwhile, they're going to get their fix. Then they into blame shifting. Something goes wrong. Something is missing. It's not. They didn't do anything wrong. It's somebody else who made them go and do drugs. They don't like drugs. No, not me. It's you. You treat me so badly. That's why I'm poor me syndrome. And what does mommy do? She goes and hugs him. Oh, sorry, son, I'm the bad person. And they end up, and the father is usually the hard guy, and he's fed up with his wife, and they both end up getting divorced. And what happens? Little old Johnny's got his mother right under, and he lives with his mother and ruins her life. They play one parent, the other. It's called the Cartesian triangle. Both parents pulling on either side, and they go right through the middle. Always play victim. You don't fall for it. And this is what the family looks like, buggered. Here's the parents not talking to each other. I told you not to give him the money, that kind of thing. Rock bottom is a statement that is often used when they reach rock bottom. Something serious happens in their life. They will get the catch-up call. Absolute nonsense. I've come across kids who lost their parents. And what makes you think when they lose their parents, they're going to say, I must give my drugs? The child is coping with a severe emotional loss. There is nothing that can take him out of that. He wants to blank himself out of that reality. So he goes back to his drugs. So I don't believe in rock bottom. It's like, oh, you met a major accident. You nearly lost your life. No, it doesn't work. Now, coming to rehabs, you got lots of these expensive rehabs do 2 to 3 weeks. It's a waste of time. It's a lot of these guys from rich families say, doc, I just went in to please my family. Once I've done, I'm going to go out. They'll give me some money. I'll go back to it. At the same time, at the other extreme, the 2 long ones that keep you in for 3-4 years are equally bad, because if you don't get better, within a period of time, you become institutionalized. I've seen people who've been 4 to 5 years become running the rehabs. The minute they went out, within the first encounter with a drug buddy, the wheels came off and they were back on their nonsense. I would now talk about duration versus resolution, because often parents say, how long would it take? There's no time period. I would rather use the word resolution instead of duration, because duration is a poor indicator. You can't say if I keep him in for 6 months, he's going to be right. The word I would use, is he resolute? And I can tell you that's difficult, because some of these substance users are so smart. They will swear under every holy book that they are determined, they've had enough, and you will think they're resolute. Only the substance user knows when they had enough. Because if they are really sincere, I can tell you, one day is enough. And I've listened to an interview of a lady who's been doing heroin for about 10 years. She came from a well-established, wealthy family in Cape Town. She landed on the streets. She sold her body. She was abused sexually. And one day she just sat on the pavement, looked at herself. And she said to herself, I come from a good family. This is not for me. From that day on, without any replacement therapy, she went cold turkey and she got better. Today she runs a company. And I've had lots of patients like that who went once into jail and said, not for me, and never looked back. I've had people 5 years in rehabs, and one temptation set in, they went back to full-blown relapse. So no longer have protect, because when you leave the rehab, you don't have the protection and the camaraderie of people. You need to be able to stand on your own, and that's what the rehabs can't do. Anyone can stay clean in a sheltered environment. The true test is on the outside. Once they leave the rehab, they need to find a way. And when they get back to their home, they're getting back to the same old environment where they see the old references. And they're so vulnerable. And they just need a buddy to say, have one hit. And the usual line is, oh, I haven't used it for a long time. One hit won't harm. Remember, one hit is too much and 1,000's too little. In other words, you take one and you're down to 1,000. What are the trigger factors? People, places, and things. People, old friends, merchants, places, drug dens, clubs, parties. If you have an alcohol problem, don't go to a place where they're offering drink. Do yourself a favor. Go and have a sleep, or go and do some meditation. Things, anger, frustration, depression, disappointment, death, tin foil. A guy sees tin foil, or a toilet seat for a cocaine guy is enough to remind him of the days how he snorted cocaine. That triggers it off. If you want to stay dry, don't go to wet places. This is symbolic. If you have to go to a place that's dangerous, make sure you take your tools. The tools are your STEP program, what you should be doing. What are the things? You need support groups. They play a vital role, because general society don't understand. You need to be in a group of people who've done the trip, understand it, will enroll you into it, will encourage you, and will listen to you. And then having a sponsor you need somebody on hand, because you have your dull moments, your dangerous moments. You need to speak to somebody. You don't need a tablet. The medicalized way of doing things, oh, you're feeling down, pop a stress pill. I don't know what's a stress pill. You need somebody to vent and speak. And this is something I learned from the NA. Addict knows addict best. And that is really true. You can be a psychiatrist, you can write 10 books and be a PhD on addiction. But if you haven't been down that road, you really don't know addiction as well as a substance user. So that's something I would readily have substance users running rehabs, because they know the trip. Giving up addiction is not just about stopping drugs. And this is what parents think. It's not about stop. It's changing behavior, changing your person. Stop being arrogant. Stop speaking lies. Stop manipulating. And there's a short word used in the NA. How stands for honesty. You can't go there and be dishonest and pretend. You have an openness. You got to be willing to listen. Remember, these guys have come with an attitude of arrogance. I know it all. Don't tell me. I can stop it. And you got to be willing. Takes a long time. I've come across guys being 20 times into rehabs and still didn't make it. Now, the word denial, I just want to give a definition of it, I believe. It's just another way of saying it refers to users who refuse to acknowledge that they have a problem with substances. No matter what you tell them, they don't want to accept it. They become argumentative. The minute you tell them, hey, pal, you got a problem. Look at what you've done over the weekend. They will become argumentative to prove their point, and don't waste your time arguing with them. They will beat you with experience. They're so good at it. They'll tell you, you mad, not me. And you'll actually believe it. Teenagers, we're going to talk about emotional stunting. When teenagers start drugging, remember that's in the phase where they're growing to learn emotions. When they're on drugs, they don't learn how to deal with emotions like anger, disappointment. They become impatient. They have this now mentality. Just like they want to, if they want to feel a high, they take a fix of a lolly and they're in cloud number 9 in 1 second. And when they want a cell phone, they want it now, and they don't get it. They like this little brat, bring bring the roof down. They can't deal with pain and loss, instant gratification. Why am I saying this? You get a 32-year-old guy, he's got the emotional well-being or emotional intelligence of a bloody 16-year-old. That is why these 32-year-old substance users carry on like babies. Mommy, you didn't even give me this. You know, that kind of thing. Mommy's boy. Let's wait for the truck. Now, family and community support is vital. I mean, you leave these guys on their own. They got nowhere to go. There comes a time when they want to make a turnaround, and you got to be there for them. And this family support is so vital. You got to bring them back into family. That should be the goal. Families also need treatment. They don't go for treatment. You need to learn how to deal with addiction. Because what happens is families start behaving like the user. They use the same language, and the word is codependence. And we're going to talk briefly about it. The families also need help, but families are too proud. They say, I don't have a problem. Why should I go? And that's the big mistake. Codependence refers to families, spouses, and substance users whose entire lives revolve around the user. I mean, just for privacy reasons, I can't tell you it was my family that got involved in addiction, but I never went to shows. I was a pity pot. I was always worried until I went to a meeting and said, no, you got to break that chain. You got to get your own life. These codependents, their entire lives are kept on hold. They do nothing. They obsess about the user and they neglect their own lives. You know, I was told if you got a partner that's on alcohol, give them another drink and bugger off and do something that they'd be happy with you. So you need to catch your life as well. The 4 Steps program, the history how I wrote this was I was an avid attendee to the 12 Steps meetings, the AA meetings, and I found the language was very highfalutin. It was written in the 1930s. Nobody dared change it. It's another religion. So I wrote a simplified version. I had a 17-year-old young man, and he was in heroin. So I rewrote the 12 steps, and he said, Doctor, I can't read. And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I wrote 4 simple steps, and I will demonstrate them to you in a moment. So the 4 steps is an alternative to the 12 steps. It's too long, too convoluted, too difficult. It's easily forgotten. It takes years to grasp. I know at one AA meeting, I overheard a 70-year-old school teacher who had an alcohol problem say, wow, I've only done step 5 and I'm 4 years. And I said, my God, I said, ma'am, you need to be 110 or 120 to do the whole 12 steps. My 4 steps is 1 minute. Yes, 1 minute. Easy to remember. It's good for the semi-literate. Children, yeah, I've had 8, 9-year-old children read it and they understood it. It's easily translated, ideal for people where English is a second language. So I would actually think, and I'm not late for this, the 12 steps should belong to the archives of the history of addiction. It's time to make a new thing. Well, this is a poem I wrote. If I get a chance to read it, I will try and read it. That's my book. It's available in the exclusive books. 4 Steps to Healing. It's a self-help handbook for users, families, and counselors. It's a very thin, easy book because when you write big books, you intimidate people because substance users don't have a good focus. They want the answer like that. And that's what my book does. It gives it to them in one-liners. How to set up it teaches you how to set up a support group. You don't have to, it's not highfalutin. You don't have to be an academic. You don't need special training. You don't need to go to universities. And the program, the way I set it, should be free. It's ideal for poor communities. Why do we want to collect money? Why do we need chairpersons and secretaries? It's too complicated, the AA meetings and NA meetings. And one of the problems I have with these NA and AA meetings, you've got people who've got a substance problem to be treasurers. You're putting a temptation into their hands. Invariably, they're going to steal the money. So that we take all that responsibility. You set up a group anywhere just under 2 people, 2 to 3 people. I ran support groups in a park. We had no venues. We sat under a tree. We sat around that and used my book and we ran it. 20 should be the limit. If it's more than 20, split into 2 groups. No special training. Grannies can run it. You see this type of granny? I've had a 75-year-old woman run it from her home. We have 5 pages of prose. We don't have this each person giving a share because sometimes it gets a little embarrassing telling to strangers what you've been through. So it gives you a broad overview of addiction and encapsulates it. At another meeting, maybe we can talk about the 5 meetings. We read the guidelines for users. I've got guidelines, and I didn't find that with the AA. They just have kind of stories about people who and their addiction stories. Mine is proper guidelines that deal with situations that the family finds themselves in or the user finds himself in and how they should deal with it. And then we have where the group introduces themselves, newcomers introduce themselves, users and family. Now, this is where my program differs. Why do we differentiate families on one side and users on the other side? I felt we need to build bridges. They need to come together. We need to bring a sense of understanding. In other words, what I try to create with my 4-step group, one parent will become I become the parent of your child and you become the parent of my child. So what happens is that you find the user will respect somebody else more than they would respect their own parents because they know they can, walk all over the parents. And the idea of bringing families together and users together, it rebuilds the trust. It brings about better understanding. Families understand what the substance user is going through. Substance user knows. So I find that's a bit outdated for me to have separate groups. And also it's convenient. You're going to have 2 meetings in 2 different areas. It's very difficult. Whereas you have one room, one place, you can have it down your street. My idea, and this is what you're going to do. People sit around, they're all equals. We end off with a closing prayer. I'm a strong advocate for meditation. I treat them, even if you do it for 2 minutes, it's good enough. You can even do walking medication. My program is not a religious program, just for your sake. I'm not a religious guy. I'm an agnostic. I believe there is God, and that's as far. But I respect the beliefs of my patients, my folk. And one thing I have come across in going through all the AANA meetings, everything, when I went there, I was looking for an answer for one of my family members. And they said, the day I found God, these guys said, I went to a psychiatrist, he wasted my time and my money. I didn't even take his pills. But the day I found God, I found my answer. So God's free. You don't get an overdose. He's available all the time, unlike a psychiatrist or me, so no, and there's no hard and fast rules. That's the other thing I found about AA. They were another religion. You brought one book outside there, what they call conference approved literature. They banned you, and I just I felt knowledge is universal. So in my program, you can quote from any book, any religious book. You can bring your own, because in my program, and I don't call it my program, I want to call it our program. We respect people as adults, not by your education, but you're a human being. There's no right or wrong answers. everybody's got an opinion about something, and we allow them. And this is, of course, what we should all be doing. My views on addiction should not be criminalized. Prisons are the worst place. People get raped. They get inducted to drug treatment centers like in Portugal. The minute a policeman sees you high on drugs, he doesn't even go to a magistrate. I think he goes to magistrate, but that's about it. And he takes you straight down to treatment center. And what we have, because when they go there, they become hard-on gangsters. They become they become permanent residents of jails. What I would recommend is halfway houses. Halfway houses is what the therapeutic community was. That's another group where the substance users look after each other. They don't have psychiatrists and social workers and psychologists and doctors. They help one another. Somehow when you're in a group, and I've found that when you're in a rehab or group of people, you can do without methadone or replacement therapy. You just have 1 or 2 weeks of replacement therapy and you're good to go. But the minute you're out, you can't manage. It's something that is strange. Addiction module, I would like to recommend that doctors training get an addiction training. I'm pleased to say that my book was recommended by the previous president of family medicine. He thought very highly of it, and he filed postgraduate students. It's a very simple book, and I'll tell you why I'm so much on simplicity. 50% of the doctor's patients have an addiction. If you ask hard enough, you'll find out either your patient has an addiction or your patient has somebody in the family that's screwing their lives, and you're taught nothing about the disease your patients have come. Most doctors are going to put their heads under the table when they say, no, I don't want to know. Nurses training, they should incorporate it. At primary school level, I think we should. A cry for help from a substance user is an emergency. I really can't stand this BS from our department says, sorry, we can only see you in 3 months. The guy is wanting to give up his drugs now. You wait 3 months. What's going to happen? He's going to hang himself. A couple of cases, if time allows me, I don't know how we're doing on time, Jackie, but there's a 40-year-old guy, EB, he was on cocaine, amphetamine, he had bipolar, he's been to 10 psychiatrists, he heard about me, he came to me, and I, unlike his psychiatrist, dealt with his addiction. EB was a smart mover. He knew Jamie Allison's book, The Unquiet Mind, about bipolar, and he manipulated me as well. It uses cocaine, and that is why his antipsychotic drugs never worked. But eventually, he came to himself and admitted himself and went to NA, and he did quite well. JM is a 37-year-old heroin spiker. He was smashing his mummy on the head with a beer bottle. That's how bad it was. He came to me. I put him on treatment for 5 years in ORT. He finished college. It became a graphic designer. He bought himself a new car and a house. And sad to say, about 2 months ago, things went wrong. I don't know what it was. And he relapsed. This is why I'm saying, you don't talk recovery. It can happen at any time. And you know, this 45-year-old female, oh, doctor, I just came for a repeat of depression medicine. That was Newsac at that time. Or it was a Prozac. And at that time, I was quite into alcoholism, and I said, why were you depressed? She said, oh, I've got my husband, he drinks. He's not a bad guy, doctor. He's just on weekends, he drinks a lot. And what does he do? Do you think he's got, no, he's not. He just sometimes he makes me run around the house. This is how ignorant people are. I said, this man's got a serious problem. And he was a principal. And he treated his wife like dirt. He'd make her pack her clothes for him to go and see his other concubine on a weekend. That's how demoralized. I taught her my program. I taught her about how to stand up against him. And she eventually became a marathon runner, did not use antidepressants, and kicked her husband out. And she's doing well. A couple who lost their son, and this is how bad it could be. They were a divorced couple, came to me, and they came to me for my help. And I said, what happened? They said, no, the one son got into a fight with the other son. The one was alcoholic drug user, stabbed the other son to death. So the one son's gone to jail, the other one's dead. And this is the tragedy of these situations. And I was telling you about grandpa. Here's your wonderful tablet. I can tell you GlaxoSmithKline didn't like me when I said it's a dangerous drug. The kids were mixing it up with tuck, with amphetamine. 47-year-old nurse, she was taking about 40 grand pause a day. She came to me. She said, Doc, I need help. I can't do without it. She was a nursing sister. Her kidneys were packing, and there was nothing we could do for her because it was just so bad. There's another nursing sister. She had an alcohol problem. She had intractable headaches. She's had about 3 scans, 3 hospital admissions, saw 8 doctors, and nobody could pick it up. Eventually, I found out that she was on still pain, which is equivalent to stopain. Got her off her drugs, weaned her off her codeines, and she did very well. Never had a headache, never went back to it. I have been 17 years in a youth prison. 99% of them are on drugs. They go back. They do recycling. They just go back in and out. They come in, and all of them were on tuck, mandrax, and cannabis. Just remember, tuck or amphetamine is a drug that keeps them awake and alive. And when they want to go to bed, they take a mandrax, or a dacha, and they go to sleep. That's it. And yeah, addiction counseling, those of you that are interested in it, it's not a science, it's an art. You need to be patient. If you're not patient, you want quick fixes like the substance users, then you're not suitable for it. You need to be empathic. You can't get angry. You got to be dispassionate. It's a difference being you be compassionate, but don't be so emotional. You empathize with them. You give them a year. Very important. Don't be judgmental. You don't know what situation they find themselves in. They might have just lost their spouse and couldn't handle it. I don't know if you guys ever heard of the guy with the golden voice. He was a top guy in the U.S. And he went to celebrate the birth of his fourth child. He sat in the bar and had 1 cocaine tablet. He ended up on the streets. But anyhow, he put a poster to say, I'm the guy with the golden voice. But he gave up his drugs from the street, got back his job. The other thing is to have an open door policy. I tell my patients, you're going to relapse. It's a possibility. If you do this, don't be afraid. I'm not going to judge you. You come back. And we doctors are the ones who have our doors open. We don't need appointments. You can come and say, Doc, I relapse. And you say, it's okay, not to worry. You give them a hand. You pull them up. Because if you turn them away, where are they going to go? Back to the merchants. It's time consuming, but I've only the art to do it in 20 minutes because it's costly. I do just 1 visit. I give them my book. I tell them what to do. And I said, if you're not doing what I'm telling you to do, you're going to hear the same thing. You're going to waste your mom's money. You make up your mind. The success rate is 1 to 2%. But you know what? I don't let the low success rate stop me. Those of you might have heard of the starfish story. If you didn't, I'll just remind you. There's a guy kept on throwing the starfish back to save them, and they kept on coming. And the child said, Daddy, why are you throwing the starfish? They're all coming back. He says, well, if I saved one, it was worth it. So that's my policy. I had a 20-year-old male, and he had 1 session with me, and I never saw this guy. And just 1 session. And I had 2 about 50-year-old people. One was a broker, and the other one was a bus driver. And he came to me, and I just plainly said to them, guys, you got a drinking problem, because they don't see it that way. The one guy didn't like me for it. The other one took my advice and told his wife, Doc said, I've got a drinking problem. From that time on, he just gave up his drinking. I said, go and pray, go to church, do something. The other guy came to me 6 months later, says, Doc, I didn't like you for telling me this, but I want to tell you, you were right. I've joined the AA thanks to you, and I gave him my rooms to start their meetings. People don't have resources. Our governments don't want to give us rooms. It's like getting, hen's teeth, to get a room. The education department won't give a room to help society, yet we pay the taxes. The rewards, I find it very rewarding. It gives up hope. From the guy I saw about the 20-year-old guy, I received a message. I didn't know who this guy was. He says, Doc, you don't know who I am, but I saw you 10 years ago. You spoke to me and you gave me that book, and I got it back. I'm on ship now. I'm phoning you. I'm texting you from the ship to say I'm 10 years clean, and thanks to you, I'm doing very well. I'm earning a good salary. And that makes me feel this way, you know? Money ain't everything, pals. And this is my thing. This is my philosophical side. Great geniuses find simple solutions to complex problems, not the Karims of the world who give you things like vaccines when Jackie and I use ivermectin. Africa needs simple solutions, and I believe with the 4 steps, we have them. It was Einstein who said, if you can't say it simply, then you don't understand it. Go and learn it. So I have got 8-year-old children who read my book and understand it. But I believe a good author is somebody who writes for his audience, not for himself. Most authors, only they understand what they're writing. They should only write one book. The 4 steps is what it is. If I can share this with you now, what it is. It's basically, God help me with my problem, and I'm going to show it to you. You giving up your problem, and that stands for the first 3 steps of the 12 steps. I'm not going to run them, so I know them off bat. It's really redundant. The next one is make me a better person. Point to yourself. And this would apply both to the user and family, because both of you get angry. Take away, when you're talking about make me a better, you need to change your personality. Even we sober people need to change our personality. Some of us are damn old narcissists. We need to look at ourselves. So do this on a regular basis. And that's the next 4 steps of the 12 steps. The next one is bring me close to my family, because these people have been torn apart from their family. When you do this, you get that feeling of hugging yourself. Bring me close to my family. Stop me from hurting them. You put in what you've done and correct it. And that's the next 2 steps of the 12 steps. And the 4th one is, thank you, God, for taking care of me. I'll be to stay clean, or I'll help my son to stay clean. So it's interchangeable. So basically, I tell them, if you can't remember it, just do this 1, 2, 3, 4. Somehow you can relate action to that. And then I do what's called a breathing technique. Those of you who want to join me, you just take a deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Smile and slowly out. And you do this a little longer. So we do a meditation process for about 3 minutes in that, and there you've got it. I believe frontline doctors, nurses, and even citizens must take the lead. You can do it. Just do it. Perfection comes with practice. You just need a commitment to do something different. I think you must be tired of just doing diabetes and hypertension. Change a person's mind. Change his life. My dream to have, this is me, the little boy there with the big dream, have my book prescribed to schools, translated into every language, make it international, start the 4 steps group. I actually want to have a 4 steps group in every street. Use your garage, use your lounge, you can do it. Yeah, I want to start with this little boy before the drug merchants get to him. And before our schools want to teach him about genders and being bisexual and how to use a condom. I mean, I think they should teach them about, I think if you are forewarned, you're forearmed. You're forearmed is forewarned. So I mean, teach them about, because they know it. Things are bad. Well, thank you guys. I hope I haven't kept you too long, Jackie, but yeah. Thank you for listening.
No, you were spot on time. Thank you, Robert. So I'm going to open the Q&A here, but I just wanted to go through what we've covered. I've shared on the SADC group the 4 presentations that came before that. And the first presentation covers why addiction happens. Because the choice to take the drug the first time is a choice. But if you are a susceptible person, you may not have a choice after that, because you get a massive dopamine dump or a massive GABA dump. Bear in mind that I have a biochemistry background, so I kind of think it at cellular biochemistry level. And then once that's happened, the patient very often, they say first the man takes the drug, then the drug takes the drug, and then the drug takes the man. So we need to be educating at junior school level as to what a dopamine and a GABA dump is, so that people are not conned into thinking this is cool. Because 10% of those people may go on to not actually have choice at a later stage. We also need to factor in, ask not why the addiction, ask why the pain. A lot of people will start using substances either because they're bored, so they're looking for artificial exhilaration, which is where lockdown was such a disaster, or they
Yeah.
do it to numb some reason. And I've had a huge number of patients that were put on opiates for a sprained ankle or without good reason. And those patients very often will come back to you and say, Doc, I was told this wasn't addictive. Why can't I stop? I'm going into withdrawal. And then if they can't get a prescription, they go to a dealer on the street. And heaven alone knows what they're getting at that point, because a lot of these street drugs are laced with methamphetamine and highly addictive substances. So the secret, I think, is early education. And then needs to be a biopsycho, social, and spiritual approach. I think the 12 steps and even the 4 steps deal with the spiritual approach and how to alter behavior. But until you fix the nutrition, sorted out the low vitamin D levels because they've been inside for the last 6 months, or they've been living in Cape Town with your dreadful weather. And sorry, but I went to university there for a long time. But they've got vitamin D deficiency, they've got vitamin C deficiency, they've got thiamine deficiency because of their alcohol. And because of that, they increase craving. And I put a slide in to say that until you manage the craving, it's 3 days to withdraw, it's 3 weeks to give something up, and it's 3 months to start a new behavior as a rule of thumb. And a 3 month program should be adequate to get somebody off if they are motivated and they genuinely want to come off. We need to understand that these substances mess up the frontal lobe, and the patient starts operating on their limbic system, which is their instinct-driven system, without the ability to inhibit behavior. And the more they use substances, the less the frontal lobe functions, the less the frontal lobe functions, the less they can inhibit. And you've actually got a brain-damaged patient. And sometimes denial is actually that the person has no insight into their own behavior and they're being driven totally by craving. And when you understand that, you are able to get that person through the craving period. And there are substances such as ashwagandha, which is an Ayurvedic medicine. This has been shown in clinical trials to be as good as Valium in stopping seizures, as good as Valium in stopping craving, but it's also completely non-addictive because it reduces cortisol. So, as you've said earlier, before we opened the call to everybody else, this is a series of lectures, and I think we should be able to get a certificate and a diploma in substance use disorder for nurses, for grandmothers, for psychologists, and for doctors, so that they can manage substance use more effectively. So I think we need to sort of focus on holistic care and simple care, which I think you and I both agree on. I want to go to Connell Logenberg. You made some very good comments in the chat. Can you unmute your mic if you're still on the call?
Hi, Jacqueline. Yes, I am.
Great. I'll let you read your own question. It's in front of me, but I think you made some very good points.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind if you want to read it.
Okay. So one of the things you've said is we need an active campaign to bring awareness so as to recalibrate our societal approach to the issue. Certainly the Canadians see addiction in part as societal fragmentation. And when society collapses, connection collapses, and addiction comes through. And I think all of us, I certainly have a cousin who, after his mother died, dived into substances, and it was very difficult to watch him collapse. So we do need a societal approach to the issue because it affects us all. The government in its Department of Health's approach is deeply misguided, that it's driven by commercial orientation as opposed to compassion. Agree fully.
Yeah.
Ministers and heads of departments appear to lack insight into the issue, therefore political responses, which aggravates instead of mitigating the circumstances that contribute to the escalating outcomes we see. What we do know from Portugal is that when they decriminalized addiction, they got rid of it because they rehabilitated instead of criminalizing the problem. One of
Yeah.
the other things I'm quite big on is that if you decriminalize it, you can monitor it. So
Yeah.
the difference between someone who's had 2 beers and someone who's just drunk a bottle of Blitz behind a wheel is very different. So if we were to decriminalize and actually be able to measure the amount of substance in the blood, we would be able to distinguish between someone who'd taken a Sudafed and someone who'd had a huge amount of methamphetamine.
Yeah.
So decriminalizing also allows monitoring, and it also removes the power of the drug dealers.
Yeah.
So I think we could learn a lot from Portugal. They reduced their substance use disorder by over 50% by rehabilitating drug addicts. So I agree with you fully. And
Do you
I
mind if I
also
add to
agree,
that, Jacqueline, if that's okay?
yeah.
Do you need me to put on my camera or is
Yeah, no, you can or you don't have to. It depends on your signal.
that's all right? I'll just try. See. Oh, hi, good evening. Lovely to see you, Dr. Rapiti. I actually
You
read
too.
I had the privilege to read Dr. Rapiti's book and a lot of inspiration from there as well. And thank you for reading that point. Perhaps just to add to what Dr. Rapiti said about what they do here in the UK, the police actually has a caravan, if you like, where people who are uh, reliant on certain types of drugs, whether it's injectable, they actually have a safe spot where they provide them with needles.
I
And
can.
sorry,
Now, please mute your mics, everybody else.
shall I continue, Jacqueline?
Oh, yeah, sorry, someone was unmuted. We'll mute them.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yes, there is a caravan where people actually can come and take their injections. So they provide them with clean needles, and those who need methadone, they give them that. They provide it for them free of charge. So there is an approach here already, which is a a non-judgmental approach. So the compassionate approach, which is what Dr. Mate talks a lot about in his book, something that Dr. Rapiti himself is also suggesting, that we do need to look at our whole societal approach. And before one can even lobby government for that approach, it is vital, in my view, that we raise awareness amongst the public, because otherwise one gets an ignorant opposition from the public, because there is that judgmental approach from the public purely because of a lack of insight. So people would say, "Oh, why would you want to support someone's drug habit," which is not really what we're seeking to do. And that's what people would see. Or people have a very harsh approach, such as our correctional service at the moment, as Dr. Rapiti rightly says that sending somebody to jail is not the appropriate place for someone who needs help, someone who needs support. Having worked in psychiatry for a long time myself, I had seen people coming back in, and I would think, all right, the person was discharged, he's got all his medication, and he was compos mentis and all okay. 4 weeks later or 6 weeks later, he's back in. And what happened? The family couldn't cope with him or her anymore, and they had taken all the money, and that person has then relapsed into the state that he was 8 weeks ago when he was admitted. So I recall saying to Dr. Karjika back then, I said, I don't think that we are actually dealing with the right problem, because we seem to be injecting this person full of haloperidol, we're giving them Lagactyls, and then others we're giving methadones and all of that, but they keep coming back. I think the problem is out there in society, is in the bigger society. I think bigger society needs help. And we need to look at what is our societal system that contributes, creates these ripening or conditions that leads us into situations that we exhibit behaviors addictive behaviors, because as we know, addiction is a symptom, a method of someone coping. And as Dr. Rapiti rightly said, that there is no such thing as an addict or an alcoholic. Someone who has an addiction to alcohol is a person who uses alcohol to cope with an underlying pain or problem. That problem could either be psychological or physiological or a combination of both. But as I've put in the point, and as Sharon has put there, we should also not just stop at asking, oh, what is the pain, but rather why that pain is there in the first place. We see so much of this exhibited, even in individuals, whether they are in external authorities such as government. We see their behaviors, they're exhibiting behaviors which is related to a sense of deprivation. And we as a country, South Africa, we do have a problem, a massive societal problem, which is psychologically affecting us all. We all live with an implicit bias of pain, and hence our adversarial responses, which is exhibiting itself in society. And hence when we have government's responses in that statement that I've put out, that Jacqueline has read, is that we see an ignorant response, because government ministers themselves are not governing in the interest of the well-being of people, but rather they operate from a commercial orientation, which contributes and aggravates the problems and the outcomes that we see escalating. Thank you so much for that opportunity to just bring that point across. And if I may, if I'm allowed, Jacqueline, just to say that I am at the finishing throes of a book I'm writing myself, also to put those very points across, which I believe is necessary for us to bring about these changes in our communities and our society at large. It starts with us in our immediate environment, and to bring that awareness before we can take that to our governing structures. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colonel. And I'm in the middle of doing a presentation that's going to be presented in July at a conference in Victoria Falls. It's a summit. And we're looking at substance use disorder. And I think a lot of the work for this was done by Professor Bruce Alexander. I've shared the slide on the screen. And he basically showed that if you put rat in rat heaven, they didn't seek opiates. But if you caged them, they did. And we need, I mean, I'm just going to flick through, excuse me, but the substance use disorder is, at least in part, a disease of modern societal dislocation. And I certainly see it, you know, and you said it very correctly, Robert, when we put somebody back into the environment in which they became addicted, then we haven't actually managed what drove the addiction in the first place. And it's usually pain, whether it's emotional or physical pain. And if you don't manage the root cause of that pain, and sometimes the pain has come from the addiction itself, because they've basically blown every bit of money that they've got, and they've destroyed their studies or their careers, or they're living on the street in a box. And that's painful in itself, and they can't get out of it. And sometimes they don't understand how they got there in the first place. Other people got into it through PTSD. The number of Vietnam War vets I saw in Australia who had massive problems with addiction because they'd never dealt with some of what they were expected to do in Vietnam. So you've kind of got to get to a root cause. Usually the substance is the solution to their inability to manage life on life's terms, basically. And because it's much easier to pop a pill, and we as the medical profession actually encourage that behavior, because it's much quicker to write a prescription for Valium than it is to counsel someone for half an hour. So we teach people that rather than actually work through their feelings, what they must do is take a prescription drug, and if they don't do that, they go and get cannabis or a sedative or whatever on the street. Dixon Chabanda, who is very well known in Zimbabwe for the friendship bench, showed that grandmothers perform better CBT than doctors do because they have time. And it's not a bad idea to train grandmothers, which gives them a sense of purpose all over Africa, to be able to work through people with substance use disorders issues. And I don't think we should lump them all in one melting pot, because every person I know who's developed addiction has a different story as to how they got there. And those that get out, which includes Anthony Hopkins, who gives some very, very good quotes on getting out of addiction, is that everybody has it in them to get out, but they can't do it alone. So even if you as a doctor are just that one person that listens to them, you can make a difference to their lives. So Dr. Rapiti, I don't know if you wanted to comment on anything that Connell said.
Yeah, no, in fact, I just wanted to make a little more comments. With regards to my book, and I didn't go into depth with my book. It looks simple, it's small, but it deals with a lot of emotion. My book deals with emotions, and it's not really just spiritual. I mean, I wouldn't align it to the AA at all. I've been to their meetings. We deal with specific emotions that people go through in the everyday life. And like I said, I do it in one-liners. What my aim in life is not to give you the full thing. I give you the skeleton, and I don't insult your brain by teaching you everything. You got to figure the thing out. When people learn things on their own, they remember it better. So I haven't gone into, because the guidelines, for example, for the user is about 22, and there's 23 guidelines for the family. And it deals with various aspects that they would find themselves in. The other thing is, I've heard this biopsychosocial approach. We're in Africa. We can't afford all that. We can't afford psychiatrists. And these guys are not crazy. They're not mad. They're people who just need something to listen to. And I found that I do a lot of work for low-income rehabs. They don't have any of those facilities. They just have somebody who's having some experience with addiction, and they have gotten better results than some of your 5-star. So we need to think Africa. We need to think simple. We need to think cost effective. And I believe that's the way to go. I would not put my child in one of these 5-star rehabs and spend, I can tell you, in Cape Town at the moment, it can cost up to $500,000. It's become big business. Just as drug addiction has become a business, selling drugs, I would think that recovery or rehabs have become a big business. So families can't afford this kind of thing. So my take is that we should be having halfway house. And grannies alone can run it. They've got that patience, like you mentioned about CBD, they're so good. And I found them to be in my group, and I ran the meetings for 10 years. I ran a support group for 10 years, and I found the old ladies were really good, really, really good, because they had that feeling, that love. That's what they need. They need a lot of love, these guys. Yeah, that's what about as much. And yeah, I'm impressed with what Canal said. Yeah,
And I agree
a
with you,
lot of
Robert.
what you said.
I certainly think the emotional side is critical to handle, and it's much more
Yeah,
important the emotional side than to dish out more drugs and become the patient's legalized drug dealer, which a lot of doctors
yeah,
don't realize that they're
yeah,
doing, because they're following
yeah,
psychiatric guidelines that have no functional basis. But the one thing I feel quite strongly about is vitamin D deficiency, because I've seen so many people get better when you correct vitamin D deficiency. And in Africa, it's free. Movement is therapy. Playing in the sun is therapy. Getting these kids off their cell phones is therapy. And so one of the functional things that I think we can do is at least advise people to move, because movement creates highways in the brain, and especially crossing the midline creates highways in the brain that other information can travel on. So, we talk about movement as therapy, and we also talk about vitamin D treatment as therapy, and dancing around a campfire at night, or music, or playing in the sun It's something we should really be enforcing in our young people as an alternative to what is currently happening at the moment. And I did this presentation for a completely different situation, but this is really what's happening in our communities at the moment. We're talking about out of school use. And what do? They go for artificial exhilaration. We should be building, instead of building rehabs, we should be doing drug testing on volleyball courts and basketball courts, so that people can't do the cool thing, which is to play sport, unless they test drug negative. So this is the situation we're facing at the moment, and how do we get our youth out of this situation?
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and I mean, with time, what we're hoping to do is do a substance use disorder summit as well, and bring in people from around the world and really go for the African solutions for African problems. We know the 5-star rehabs don't work. Very often, the people who have gone into them have absolutely no resilience because they've come from extraordinarily wealthy backgrounds, and it doesn't help to not put them through some resilience training. And so I don't agree with the 5-star rehabs, but I've seen at least 50 patients in Harare recover with home nursing and the right advice, and putting someone with them, which actually costs about $30 a day, to sit there 24/7 and give them haloperidol when they are craving, with the understanding that we're weaning them off the substance and getting their brain right. But they have to be committed to a long-term alternative, which is making something out of their life going forward. So John Grinder, who has a 70% success rate, his comment when the patient walks in is, "So you've come here for help. You want to change something. What I want you to do is to go and drink excessively and take as many prescription and non-prescription drugs as you can." And the patient goes, "Watch." But you access and you make an ally with the subconscious with that comment. And then there's a pause, until you and I find something that does for you what the drugs currently do. You can't give anything up, but you can replace it. And until you find something to replace this in young people in particular, which might be sport, it might be education, there's a myriad, it could be music and dance, but they have to do something instead of taking the substance. And you need to quantify whether they're taking it because they're looking for artificial exhilaration, because it's now unsafe to skateboard without a helmet, or to do whatever crazy things we did at university, which for me included tobogganing down Jamison Hall steps on a Teflon toboggan, which seemed an extremely good idea when I was 19, but I'm paying for the injuries now. And they don't have exhilaration, and a lot of them also have pain is unresolved, perhaps from a broken family, perhaps from the death of a parent, but whatever it is, until you fix the reason they're using the substance, whether it's boredom or pain, you aren't going to ever cure the person, because the moment they take the substance again, they get relief. You need to ensure that they no longer require relief. And that's my opinion, having seen a lot of these people.
Jackie, the other thing is that, my take on especially chemical drugs, and any addiction for that matter, is to taper it off. It seems to be a far better way. It's a soft landing. And I've been very into studying SSRI addictions. They lied when they said the SSRIs are not addicting. There are so many articles, authors, professors talking about SSRIs as being highly addicting. What the pharmaceutical industry did, by the way, is when people got to know about benzodiazepines being very addicting, they suddenly made it sound that, you could use an SSRI for anxiety because it's not addicting. But it turns out it's very addicting. And the moot point that was made by a psychiatrist who was a student when he had anxiety and became hooked on it and discovered that these drugs weren't helping him, he's now become a specialist in the UK where he's helping. His main job is getting people off the SSRIs. And he was saying, you got to be so careful. You got to literally do it in minute doses and wean yourself off it, because if you do it suddenly, you have a problem. So that's something we need to bear in mind when you withdraw from these drugs. And not everybody can do cold turkey. Yeah, sorry.
I
Yeah.
agree with you 100%. When I get people off nicotine, I tell them if they're on 30 a day, I want them to smoke 29 on Monday and 28 on Tuesday and 27 on Wednesday. And as you go down until they've got one cigarette in their pocket, and they can have it anytime, but they just can't have it in the next hour. Because I'm of the mentality, if anybody tells me I can't do something, I will prove them wrong. And that is very common in addiction type personalities. If you say you can't have this, you want it. It's like, don't think of a chocolate, don't think of a cake, and you try and give something up. It's very difficult. But if you give someone a positive instruction, which is, I want you to take 4 cigarettes today when you were on 30 before, and they delay the gratification, I think you get much better outcomes. And you also have to understand there's a biological dependence system, and going cold turkey is very, very difficult. And especially with the SSRIs and the benzos. I think getting a patient off benzos is probably
Impossible.
the hardest thing to do. Getting patients off SSRIs, I agree with you 100%. When I worked at Victoria Hospital, all the orthopedic patients got morphine and Valium at night. So they didn't disturb the rest of the ward. And we were told that morphine and pain wasn't addictive. Well, I know quite a few patients who ended up with heroin addicts after Victoria casualty. So the same way, we believed that morphine wasn't addictive, and we would laugh at that now. In 20 years' time, we're going to laugh at people who say SSRIs aren't addictive.
Yeah. On the question of cigarette smoking, and I must just mention that it's not just good enough to say to them, just reduce your drug. It's a multifaceted approach. I do what's called psychoeducation. It takes me 15 minutes, but it's well worth it. I tell them about the financial aspects, why they took up to smoking, what effect it has in an hour. And the way I tell them to combat that craving is simply deep breathing and stretching your arms so they have something to do. So every time they get the craving, I say, try and stretch your use of the drug and do the deep breathing. I had a lady who smoked 40 a day. Within 2 weeks doing the breathing exercise, she gave up the smoking. So it's not just telling them stop, do something else instead of that. People feel
and do something that relieves anxiety.
Yeah, well, the other thing is people say, what can I replace? I said, what makes you think you need to replace something? I said, lie down and listen to some nice music. That's relaxation, not smoking. Because one of the reasons that they feel relaxed is not the nicotine. It's this habit, of moving their hands backwards and forwards. People are restless by nature and wanting to eat sweets. That's the worst thing, because sweets is like another version of cocaine. So, so if you do the costing and you don't go there attacking them, you tell them, look, you try and you keep repeating yourself. And they found that a doctor who spends 15 minutes educating his patient can get 50% of his patients off cigarettes. That was one study.
No, I mean, it's amazing. And like you said, we could talk about this all night. So I think we need to get more further sessions booked. I think the attendance is always very good on the substance use disorder. I think there's very little teaching on it in medical schools, and it's a subject that just gets swept under the carpet. On doctors' groups, you'll hear this patient's doctor shopping, but nobody ever mentions who started the drug in the first place. And so doctors are often unconscious that they create addicts. And that's where I think a lot of education needs to go. We need to educate young people under high school level, so 10, 11, 12 years old, and we need to educate doctors that many of these psychiatric drugs are highly addictive, and all they're doing is becoming the patient's legal drug dealer.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
We're
Thank you.
almost at 8 o'clock. I've got staff that are going to need to go home who are running the call. Thank you very much, everyone. And are there any questions I've missed on the chat? Let me just go into it. Bearing in mind, I'm not a techno wizard by any stretch of the imagination. So, people have asked how they get your book. Connell, you've said it's on Amazon. We've had lots of thanks for a great presentation. And people say they learned a lot. So I think we should.
Sorry, Jackie, it's not on Amazon. Somehow my publisher took it off. It's now available on Exclusive Books.
Exclusive book. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robert. And I think we should be starting. There's certainly a lot of interest in starting a rehab center in Victoria Falls, which will definitely not be a high-level exclusive rehab, but it will be a very practical rehab. And I also believe that if you get people to do something meaningful, which could include running an animal orphanage as an example, people then engage in getting out of themselves and helping someone else, which I think is a, you know, in AA, they say you need to help another addict. Actually, you don't. You can work in an old age home or work in an orphanage, but actually do something for nothing with no expectation of an outcome. And that makes people feel good about themselves because they actually contribute to humanity. So thank you, everyone. Great session. I'm going to end the call now. And I think we should plan on doing this at least once every 2 months.
Yeah, good idea.
Great. Thank you, Connell.
Thank you.
And thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Connell. Thank you. Yeah.
I hope I'm pronouncing.